been a long day, second to last session. We're waiting to film. All right, and I think we're ready to begin. So, this is a talk about, ostensibly about a piece of software that we developed internally that makes Hive easier to use. But there's a little bit more of a background behind it, maybe an overarching theme. So since I expect this to be a more technically oriented crowd, it is a more technically oriented talk. But I would like you all to pay attention, and I'll kind of repeat myself about what I think the big takeaway is. So just a quick, outline of what I'm going to try to talk about in these 40 minutes, and it's pretty basic. We have this software. I'll tell you what it is, why we built it, when there are so many other things that could probably do what this does and do it better, how it's being used, and it's being used extensively at TripAdvisor. And then, how we went into the design and the requirements, and kind of the special sauce that actually makes it work are the templates. Finally, I'll just have a brief word on how you can get the source. We've open sourced it. It is up and available on GitHub, and there'll be a link on the slides, and you can find these slides on SlideShare as well. And then, future plans and possibilities. It's open sourced now. I am hoping that there are people here who might want to help hack on it and extend it and add features and functionality. And in fact, I've been doing that basically, since I got on the plane to get here, and doing stuff that I haven't had time to do when I'm actually in the office. So let's begin. I'm a software engineer at TripAdvisor. I'm an operations engineer. I work in the data warehouse group, and we have a fairly large, well, not large, it's large to us, Hadoop clusters. A couple of them, the largest of them, just topped 60 nodes last week, with well over 1.5 petabytes of capacity in just that one cluster, and probably another 1.5 in the other ones that we operate. Me personally, I like things that just work. That you install it, you might edit a config file, and you hit go, and it does its job. And everybody has different needs. And so there are tons and tons of ways to configure things, but as you can see, I'm more than mildly obsessed with making things work. So my background, I started off as a PC technician, became an email admin, got into telco, network management systems. I even hacked Lisp for another company for a little while, Closure, very, very enjoyable. And it's about automation, making the computers do the work. Before I joined TripAdvisor less than a year ago, I didn't have any Hadoop experience. And that's a lot like the rest of my team. We're the small group where we're focused on delivering the services, the Hadoop services, to people throughout the company at whatever skill level they may be, whether they be seasoned Java hackers, data scientists, engineers, or sales, marketing, legal, okay, management, people who use Windows and are very, very scared of a terminal. So, we support everybody that whole way up and help them make use of the things that we do with Hadoop. So we develop tools. We work with the developers. All of us can code, and that's important. We're a real DevOps group. TripAdvisor is great. I've been there, like I said, almost a year, and it is really a different place to work than any place I've ever been. For over 1,600 people working there, it's one big team. we work together. We're all focused on this goal, and we all know that we're all skilled people, and we trust that in each other, you know. And we are hiring. And if you're interested in giving me your resume or something, I've got some special T-shirts for you, by the way. Or even just, you know, you want to send it later, I'll give you one because they gave me a bunch to hand out. So let's start. What is the Hive Query Tool? All it is in that headline, a simple web interface for running reports on Hive. Pretty much nothing more, nothing less. When we were looking about 8-9 months ago, you know, November or so of last year, at other products, basically what we found were things that either were not flexible enough for our needs, didn't fit all of these needs, or were just far too complicated for the users it was targeted at. We were targeting non-technical people, okay? It had to be easy for non-technical end users, you know, people who don't open a command line, you know, even people who don't know SQL, okay? They're comfortable with the spreadsheet or running something that was pre-created for them in like, you know, SQL Server, some sort of reporting front end for that. We needed something that simple so that they could access and make reports from the data that we store in Hive. But the things out there that we had, like Hue, we took a look at it, and you know, it has this very friendly web GUI. You know, users could get lost in it, but we could train them. But you know, just simple parameter substitution into HQL isn't sophisticated enough. They want to filter and group and do things like that. You know, but they don't want to know the SQL syntax to do that. So I kind of came up with this template system that enables us to make templated HQL and gives them a really simple web interface that they can do it. And you'll see a few screenshots of that later on. It had to be easy to install and administer. We're a small team. You know, we operate all of these machines. It's a heterogeneous system. They're not all, you know, identical machines with identical OSs. So we've got a lot to do. We didn't want maintenance of whatever we used to be another, you know, another full-time thing. And of course, you know, if other engineers were going to use it to build queries and to build forms for non-engineers to use, you know, we needed something that they would adopt quickly. Not something that they would follow the steps on, you know, on a website or the vendor that we got it with, you know, 23.5, as I say, steps for installing, configuring, and then it still doesn't work. And you know, most of our hackers are Java people, and it turns out that this isn't written in Java. So when I started building it, I realized, okay, I have to make it really, really simple. So that's how simple it is. Check out the source, run the setup script, edit a single config file, and then run the startup scripts for the front end and back end. It's that simple, and people around TripAdvisor have been, you know, using it, extending it, hacking on it. So one of the requirements that we had was we had to run jobs with different users and, you know, run those jobs with priority queues, with the priority scheduler. You know, we can't be the only place, I think, that, you know, we care about who is using how much capacity on the clusters. Different departments essentially buy capacity on the cluster. You know, they say we need to run, you know, all these reports. We're running out of slots. We're gonna pay for more servers, and so we up their scheduler priorities and their queues. And so when people log in and use the Hive Query Tool, queries are run as their user from LDAP and run in the queue appropriate for them and their query. Most of the other front ends that we looked at use the Hive Thrift server, and it's just terrible. It runs everything as one user. It's not stable, at least not in our experience. Now, we're running CDH3, and so, maybe it's gone through a transformation since then. I have talked to people about Hive Thrift Server 2, but I will not so humbly put my opinion out there that Hive Thrift Server has its use, but it needs work. So what the HQT does, it actually wraps the Hive CLI. And if you think that's outrageous, well, that's what Oozie does. If you dive down into Oozie's code, it actually loads the Hive CLI Java class and invokes the main or the run method on it, passing it. It writes out a HQL file, passes it a -f to the path to that file, and that's how Oozie does it. So it seemed good enough for us, and it gives us the flexibility that we need to use sudo to change users, so that we can run under those users and then set the queues. Some of the other things we looked at, did a lot of different things, and they, either claimed to be faster than Hive and weren't, or they were, but they required that we completely restructure our data, and we've already got a lot of data in Hive, and so they were kind of non-starters in that way, and some of them were a lot slower. The HQT simply runs Hive, so that it bought us that. So you're probably wondering, why did we need this when there's so many other things out there? All this data we keep pumping in is just growing in value to the business, and we keep feeding it in. And again, not just senior analysts and data scientists and engineers need it. Everybody really kind of needs access to it. And there's supposed to be just a fancy smiley on that screen, but the font didn't show it. So, they don't know SQL, but they know kind of how they want to filter. A customer says, hey, we want to know what our clicks were, for last month, for grouped by geolocation, so grouped by geolocation, but don't count pop-ups, clicks through pop-ups. And it's not a difficult HQL query, but it's one that a salesperson talking to one of our partners isn't going to know how to do. Well, with the Hive Query Tool, they can do this. So, and they can choose all sorts of parameters, and it's very flexible, and they don't have to know HQL. So, I pretty much covered this, but some of this stuff looked down, but when it came down to it, in November or so of last year, we kind of thought, okay, can we get what we want from a product? Will we have to hammer it into submission? How much will it cost us for the product and for the engineering to manage it and hammer it into submission? Or could we build something because, our needs were simple. We knew what we wanted. We knew it wasn't complex. And so, I did some thinking about it when my manager asked me. And I had a bit of a eureka moment, and I hacked out a prototype in a couple days with my, my spare time. And I showed it to him, and he thought, this could work. So we spent more time on it and made it a little nicer, a little more robust, and started letting people use it. And it was a surprise hit. We could have given them some of the more fancy packages that gives them all the graphs and roll-ups and drag and drop and everything. And I think a lot of these people would have been either confused or overwhelmed by that. We gave them exactly what they said they needed and what they said they were useful and what they said they wanted. They liked how it worked. They requested more features. Other groups actually pulled engineering resources to help develop it to the point that we could kind of roll it out and make it available company-wide. And it's really just simple software. We just open sourced it, and other people can check it out and play with it and extend it, and or just steal ideas from it, take them. It's about making this stuff accessible. We've got a lot of report templates. I need to make some more example ones to upload to GitHub because the ones that we use internally, of course, we're not going to share from you. Hi, you have a question?
So what's it written in? It's not Java.
Well, we'll come up with that. So yeah, people like it. The template system was the eureka moment that I mentioned. I just came up with this idea that probably violates every good computer science, tenet, and hashed it out, and it works remarkably well. People think of it more as a template language or directives, and it's not even just engineers that are authoring templates. People are actually learning to do it. People who know HQL, and then they look at the function, the template function documentation, and hack up their own templates and push them up. And so enough people are using it that we've actually had to throttle. We've had people who are not already in a dedicated queue. We had to actually put them into another queue and kind of throttle them back because they were choking the cluster, at least the smaller one. So here we'll get to the design, what's written in. So it's front-end, back-end design. Makes it easy to extend and modify. So we got a web interface that handles user authentication, processes the templates, and it submits jobs to the back end and gets progress and status info from the back end on request. And that's about it. The back end basically is it's a simple little web server that prevents a sort of JSON-y REST-like interface, and basically spawns Hive CLI instances and tracks and parses the output so that you know that job 4 of 12, Hadoop job or task 4 of 12 is 30% through, so we can actually give them give on the web front end a representation of the progress. And the back end right now sends email notifications that a job is started and that it's completed and what its status was, and a link to the results. I'm working on factoring that out. It doesn't belong there. The template system is, like I said, kind of the special sauce. There's this template language, and so when you embed these directives into HQL, the directives are overloaded. They're just function calls, really, for the underlying template engine, and the function calls know what context they're being called in, and in one context, they spit out a data structure that the web front end uses to build the GUI, and when the user has filled out their options, we stuff all that data into a data structure and give it back to the template engine. And in that context, it validates the input and generates HQL. But it's very flexible. So you wanted to know, I wrote it in Perl. I hacked it up because I'm an ops guy. And so, being in operations, that's what I do. And I got to play with some nice new things. Front-end web framework is something called Modulicious, which is actually really pleasant, and I'm not a web dev, but it made me like it. Template system uses something called text template, which allows you to basically inject arbitrary Perl code into a namespace, evaluate a template within that namespace, and the template basically will contain functions. The functions may not even look like functions because you can omit the parentheses and things like that. But then it calls those functions in the namespace. And because of that, people are actually defining their own validation functions. So in the namespace where it's evaluated, I've loaded up like the date time module so that they can correctly generate and output dates and times in various representations. And for the things that were built in an OO fashion, I use something called Moo, which is kind of like Moose, which actually makes writing object-oriented code in Perl feel normal. So you could actually call it a bit of an example of modern Perl, and if people are interested in hacking on it and learning about it, I'm happy to, oblige. So system requirements are actually quite simple. You need 5.10 or newer. 5.10.1 is pretty old now, so you should have that. It's installed by default on CentOS 6, Red Hat 6, and it's been that or newer is available on Mac OS and Ubuntu and whatnot. You install your Hadoop and Hive client libs and whatever configuration you might want on the client side. Don't run it as root. It doesn't need it. But if you do want to run jobs as different users, as the users who log in, you're going to want to set up any LDAP that you need. You put your LDAP configuration into the configuration file, and you'll need to configure sudo so that the HQT can run the Hive command as sudo. So, and that way it can run jobs as whatever user happens to be logged in. And it actually surprisingly works even if the user doesn't have an account on the system, because it doesn't need to change their home directory or anything like that. You don't need a web server. You can deploy it under Apache or Nginx or whatever. You can use PSGI or FastCGI or SCGI. Modulicious handles all of that for you, but it also has a handy little web server built in that has a nice feature in that it will reload the config and any classes as you change them. So it watches the libraries, and I have it configured to watch the directory with all the HQL template files. So it automatically gets them, reloads them, refreshes. So from a technical perspective, the front-end code is rather nice. Modulicious is an MVC-style web framework. It's also got a light variant, which is, has some things in common with like Sinatra. It uses EPL templates, which are very similar to ERB, but it's Perl code instead of Ruby code. You can actually use whatever template system for the web pages themselves. But I chose not to use EPL for the actual HQL templates because, again, I needed that funkiness of being able to evaluate functions in different ways. And also, I didn't want to scare people by making them think that they were writing Perl. So the back-end code is kind of hairy. I've been meaning to refactor it, and actually I'm working actively on that. Any event is an event-driven, it's a framework for writing event-driven applications. It's very flexible because it can run on just about any event loop that you throw at it or want to use. It has one built in, but it can use libev, it can use glib. Whatever you happen to have available. So it's very portable, but it is kind of low level. Also, the back end, like I said, the REST and JSON stuff is too mixed, but I'm teasing that out right now with my refactor of that. And like I said, the back end shouldn't be sending email. It really should be posting back to the front end. The template system code, though, is actually rather simple. So each function basically checks a meta parameter. And depending on the value of the meta parameter, it knows what context it's being called in and whether or not it should be validating data or creating a data structure for the web front end. The other engineers seem to like it, and they've extended it quite a bit. Again, I'm kind of a perfectionist, so I think it needs refactoring because of that action of a distance. At a distance, I'd actually like things to be an OO sort of thing, so that under one context, so all the functions would be in a parent class, and under one context, it would instantiate a subclass of that does the web content generation, and in another context, it would instantiate a different subclass that would do the actual HQL generation. And of course, the data structures that we pass in and put out, those should be objects. I just, I did get used to using raw data structures when I developed Lisp. I grew to like it a bit much. So let's actually see what these templates look like. They're just these blocks embedded into normal HQL. I just use the default template delimiters, but you could use whatever you want, really. I could probably even make that a configuration parameter for the app itself. But what you're looking at there is actually just Perl code. The begin main select is somewhat of a sad necessity at this point because I didn't figure out a good way to figure out where, if there are several queries in a file, the one that actually produces the results, I hadn't yet figured out a way to figure out which one was, the very last select query being run. It's not as simple as just splitting on semicolons. So they put that in to denote that, and that way some code gets inserted there for, making sure that the queue, the priority queue is being set, and that an insert overwrite external, file is being put in there because that's where the results are written currently. So with this, it's a simple variable insertion. The variable is named date. It is of type date. So in the web interface, you actually get a nice little, jQuery date picker. And that also tells it, the back end, the front end, that it ought to be a valid date that gets put in there. And you can actually assign additional validation functions to be run. You can put them above the query someplace, in a block, and say, validation, and then, give it a list of parameters and functions, or just closures, subroutines, bare subroutines with the validation code in them. And so, like I said, you can kind of do whatever you want in there. The next one appends to that where clause. So it just doesn't insert the where, and it knows that it needs to insert the appropriate commas or whatever. But the cool thing is with the insert where and append where functions. So these are the columns. These are the columns that they have to choose from in this example. The interesting thing is that let's go forward a bit. So this becomes this, and so the where clause says add filters. So the users just see this. They see enter a date. Okay, they enter a date, and in fact, actually, when they click on that box, they get a date picker. They can choose to enter one manually, but they can use the date picker if they want. Add filters, and they can click on add filter, and it will give them a drop-down list of the columns that were cleared. And of course, when they enter in the information, if the column requires an integer, they will get a little error message on the page saying that that needs to be an integer, or if it needs to be a string. Oh, I think we have the limit clause in there. It just puts it in by default right now. So either that or I was rendering from something different. So anyway, it can insert limit clauses. It can insert group by clauses. And if you do that, you put something in the select to say where to put the group by columns because they have to be in the select. And so, OK, here's an example of how it's filled out. Like I said, you can add the and, the or, and the people using this is what they understand. They get this. It fits their needs. So I'm going to come back to that now. This fits their needs and their expectations because we asked them, and we talked to them, and that was important to make this sort of stuff accessible to them. And there's actually a remarkable amount of flexibility that this gives them for putting in comparison operators in clauses, and and we can do some training based on that. It's much easier than trying to train them up on something more complex. So let me take a quick look, and here's the HQL that gets generated from that right there when I did some fill outs of the various fields. So, or from actually what you saw right there. So, and it generates the HQL properly. I think we try to format it nicely, but it really doesn't matter. Hive doesn't care. And so that is actually dropped into an HQL file and run with the Hive client. And it's simple as that. The user gets an email saying that their job has started and a link back to the page where they can view the status, which will show them progress in percentages. It will say, how many stages this query has and what % progress it's made on which stage it happens to be in. And it sets their expectations, and so we're working on it. The template engine really isn't anything new. Just used the existing module in a clever way. And like I said, just use some trickery so that you don't have to put in your parentheses and ending semicolons and things like that. So they look like directives, but they're just functions. And there's a lot of functions in that namespace. So for just value insertion, substitution, and adding and extending where clauses, et cetera, et cetera. I would love to show more complicated examples, but you can see them, and I'll push them up, push more up on GitHub. So the template files look like this. It's a YAML header, followed by the 3 dots, which denotes the end of a YAML document, and then under that is the actual HQL code, the template code. So it's engineers who are building queries for the salespeople and for the for the other people. They like this just fine. It works for them, and they don't have to go too far out of their way. They write this file and then they run a quick test. In fact, they can run their own server really simply, because all they have to do is check out the source, run the setup script, and then test it, and it works. So, I've already mentioned a lot of these issues, and some I want to point out, though, is that template evaluation. It is evaluating Perl code. I haven't put it into a sandbox yet. I really should. If anybody knows how to do that, patches welcome, but I do plan on working on that soon. So. The APIs of the various template functions isn't quite consistent. They've been developed by a number of different people, and so in some functions you need to use curly braces. In other functions you don't need to use curly braces to define parameters. And so it would be nice to make them all consistent so that they all have the same signature, where you have your function, your directive, you've got a name associated with that directive, and then in curly braces, you've got whatever parameters you want to pass to it. So trying it for yourself, it is on GitHub now. It is, I just got it made public just the other day. And these slides are up on SlideShare with this link, okay? It is Apache 2.0 licensed, so we like open source. We use it, and so we like to put stuff out there. The system requirements are right there on the GitHub page. The README tells you everything that you need to know, and then some. But it really is as simple as download, and if your system meets the requirements, download, run the setup script, edit the configuration file, and go. And we're really happy to work with an open source community for open source things. TripAdvisor has a number of other open source projects up there as well that might be worth looking at. So the future of this. So now that it's out there, and I really want to completely rewrite that back end, and like I said, I'm hacking away at it right now on a branch that hopefully I'll have something running by the end of this week. The sandboxing that I mentioned, we would like to kind of save people's pre-filled queries. Right now it doesn't do that, and that's kind of a pain in the butt. It would be nice to have easier management. That's more of a web interface, a GUI thing, because right now they can kill running jobs, they can delete the info from previously completed jobs, and delete the data, but they actually have to go through their job list and click each one and click delete and click. I'm not a web GUI guy, but it should be easy to do. I need to put column headers in the report output because we currently do an insert overwrite into local directory. We don't get the column headers, but the rewrite of the backend does do that. And so yeah, it would be nice to, add features, but again, we need to focus, I need to focus on keeping it as simple as possible for the people using it. So let's see. There are possibilities here, adding workflow and scheduling functionality. I know I need to run this report every week with the date advanced by a week. So, maybe it would be nice to add something where somebody could log in and say, these are my recurring queries, and a schedule for them. Right now, you can do multiple queries in a single HQL template, but it's not really a workflow. So that could be interesting, but maybe it's best to go to Azkaban or Uzi for that. I've been thinking of making the back end, like cleaning up its API and making it somewhat of a viable, somewhat replacement for the Hive Thrift server, but we'll see how good Hive Thrift Server 2 is. I would like to add template functions to be able to construct entire joins and subselects and things, and there's no reason we can't do it, just nobody's asked me yet, and so I haven't done it. So we would like to have a single template be able to deliver multiple result sets. And the last one is just a joke, because people keep coming to me throughout TripAdvisor, because we're a Java shop, and they're like, it's in Perl? And so I kind of expected that here, but I'm actually not getting that. It's rather nice. So I like to tell them it's not in Perl. It's in Perl 6, and then their heads explode. So, that's what it's all about. Any questions? We got 3 minutes. Hi. Please come to the microphone.
Hive is notoriously high latency.
Mm-hmm.
Has that been an issue for your users? Are they okay with waiting to get an email message back that their report is done?
The email message tells them that their report has been queued, and when it starts, if there's enough delay, when it starts, they get a message that it's been started. So that helps.
How long does it take for a typical report?
Well, it depends on the complexity of their query. Some of their queries finish in 5 minutes. Some of them take hours. And of course, it depends on what scheduler queue they're running in. If it's just some random person who isn't part of, say, the commerce team or ad ops or a group that already has resources, then they might have to wait a while if other people are using up all the slots. Luckily, it does email them. It would be nice if I added, you are so-and-so in line, sort of functionality. That would actually be rather nice.
And one more question.
Sure.
You mentioned you're using Cloudera.
Yes, we are.
So have you looked into using Impala as a backend instead of Hive?
That is something that we will be looking at very soon, actually. This was kind of a stopgap sort of thing that we threw together, and people loved it. And, people loved it so much, we thought maybe there's some value there. So that's kind of what it came to. Something I don't think I added in the last slide is that we are hiring, my groups especially. We have a couple slots, so feel free to come up to me with your resumes or anything like that you have, or just email careers@tripadvisor.com, because we're always looking for talented people with creativity, people who like to learn and thrive on it, and it's a great place to be. I'm glad they sent me here to tell you about this. So thank you. So does anybody want to